Chapter 1. The Great Disappearing Act, 1945. The spring of 1945 was supposed to be the hour of reckoning. As the Soviet Red Army battered the gates of Berlin and the Western Allies crossed the Rhine, the top brass of the Third Reich faced a crumbling reality. The thousand-year Reich was ending in 12. In the chaotic ruins of Europe, millions of people were on the move. Refugees, liberated prisoners, and soldiers. Amidst this human tide, thousands of individuals, men with blood on their hands and secrets in their hearts, began a desperate transformation. They burned their uniforms, removed their SS blood group tattoos, and acquired the papers of dead soldiers or common civilians. The scale of the escape was unprecedented. While the world watched the Nuremberg trials, expecting a total cleansing of the Nazi stain, a silent exodus was occurring. It wasn't just low-level guards. It was the architects of the Holocaust, the scientists who weaponized gas, and the commanders who leveled cities. They were moving through a landscape of broken borders and exhausted officials. This wasn't just luck. It was the beginning of the most successful mass escape in history. How did so many high-profile targets slip through the finest intelligence nets of the 20th century? The answer lies in a complex web of complicity, geography, and the brewing shadow of a new war. Chapter 2. The Architecture of the Rat Lines. The term rat line perfectly captures the nature of these escape routes, a system of ropes that sailors use to climb a ship's mast, or, in this case, a desperate path for rats to leave a sinking ship. These were not random paths, they were organized corridors of safety. The most prominent route led from the heart of Germany, through the snowy passes of the Alps into South Tyrol, Italy, and finally, down to the chaotic ports of Rome and Genoa. Italy was the perfect transit point, a country recovering from its own fascist collapse, where bureaucracy was in shambles and the church held immense local power. Central to this network was Bishop Alois Hudel, a pro-Nazi clergyman who served as the rector of a seminary in Rome. Hudel believed that by helping these men, he was saving souls from the godless communism rising in the East. He utilized his influence to secure Vatican-issued identification papers. With these documents, the Red Cross, often unknowingly or through internal sympathizers, issued humanitarian passports. A man who had supervised the murder of thousands at a camp could, in a matter of weeks, become a stateless refugee named Ricardo or Klaus, with a legitimate passport and a ticket to a new life. This logistical miracle was funded by hidden Nazi gold and, in some cases, the emerging intelligence agencies of the West, who were already looking for assets in the upcoming Cold War against the Soviet Union. Chapter 3. Klaus Barbie, the Butcher and the Asset. Among those who used these routes was Klaus Barbie. As the head of the Gestapo in Lyon, Barbie was a sadist who personally participated in the torture of the French resistance leader Jean Moulin. He was a man who ordered the deportation of Jewish children from an orphanage in Lisieux. By any moral standard, he was a monster. Yet, as the war ended, his status changed from war criminal to intelligence asset. The American Counterintelligence Corps, CIC, found his knowledge of communist networks in France incredibly useful. Instead of handing him to the French hangman, the CIC protected him in safe houses in Germany. When the political pressure became too high to hide him in Europe, the Americans helped him escape through the rat lines in 1951. Barbie, now using the name Klaus Altmann, arrived in Bolivia. There, he didn't just hide, he thrived. He became a successful businessman and eventually a military advisor to various Bolivian regimes, teaching them the same interrogation and torture techniques he had perfected in France. He lived in the open, frequenting the German club in La Paz, and traveling internationally. It took decades of tireless work by Nazi hunters Serge and Beate Klarsfeld to bring his true identity to light. Even after his exposure, it took a change in the Bolivian government to finally extradite him in 1983. Barbie died in a French prison, but only after having lived 32 years of his post-war life as a free man, protected by the very governments that had vowed to destroy him.
Chapter 4. Joseph Mengele, the Phantom of South America. No name evokes more horror than that of Dr. Joseph Mengele, the Angel of Death at Auschwitz. His crimes were uniquely personal and grotesque, conducting horrific medical experiments on twins, dwarves, and children. When Auschwitz was liberated, Mengele simply vanished. For nearly 4 years, he lived as a simple farmhand in Bavaria under the name Fritz Hollmann. It is a chilling thought. The man who decided the fate of 400,000 people with a flick of his wrist was quietly milking cows in the German countryside while the world searched for him. In 1949, Mengele fled to Argentina. During the presidency of Juan Perón, Argentina became a sanctuary for former Nazis. Perón saw them as useful technocrats and soldiers who could help modernize his country. Mengele lived a surprisingly comfortable life in Buenos Aires, even using his real name for a time and practicing medicine without a license. However, after the Mossad captured Adolf Eichmann in 1960, Mengele was gripped by a paralyzing paranoia. He fled to Paraguay and then to Brazil. He spent his final years living in remote farmhouses, surrounded by guard dogs and constant fear. He was never captured. He died of a stroke while swimming in 1979 and was buried under the name Wolfgang Gerhardt. It wasn't until 1985 that forensic experts confirmed the remains were his. He evaded justice until his last breath, leaving behind a legacy of pain that no trial could ever heal. Chapter 5. Aribert Heim, the Doctor in the Desert. While many fled to the Southern Hemisphere, others looked to the Middle East. Aribert Heim, known as Dr. Death for his lethal injections at Mauthausen, followed a different path. For years, he practiced medicine in Germany after the war, remarkably undetected. When the net finally began to close in 1962, he vanished. Investigators spent decades following false leads in Chile and Uruguay. The truth was far more unexpected. Heim had settled in Cairo, Egypt. He converted to Islam and adopted the name Tariq Farid Hussein. In a bustling city of millions, the former SS doctor lived a quiet, scholarly life, obsessing over anti-Semitic literature and local politics. He became a familiar face in his neighborhood, known as a gentle old man who took long walks. He died in 1992 of cancer. Like Mengele, he proved that with a new name and a change of scenery, a mass murderer could disappear into the fabric of everyday life, protected by the indifference or the protection of foreign governments. Chapter 6. The Long Shadow of Justice. The escape of these men was not just a failure of police work. It was a moral failure of the post-war world. As the Cold War intensified, the pursuit of Nazi criminals became a secondary priority. Enemies became allies, and the atrocities of the past were often swept under the rug for the sake of regional stability. But the story doesn't end with their escape. The work of Simon Wiesenthal and others ensured that the world never truly stopped looking. Their efforts turned the disappeared into the hunted. Even if many of these men were never brought to a courtroom, they lived their lives in the shadows, stripped of their true names and their legacies. The hunt for them served a vital purpose. It sent a message that there is no statute of limitations on genocide. As we look back at the mysterious vanishing of these criminals, we are reminded that history is not just about what happened. but about what we allow people to get away with. The rat lines may have saved their lives, but they could never save them from the judgment of history.